And welcome to Elder Interviews, a collaborative effort from Creation Spirituality communities, where we explore the lives and experiences of our Creation Spirituality elders, women and men whose spirits shine with the hard-won wisdom of the sage. My name is Penny Andrews from Wisconsin, and I'm delighted to be your host for this session. It is also my pleasure to introduce Creation Spirituality Community's leader extraordinaire, Gail Ransom, who will be speaking with Ardine Martinelli, a fellow 2001 graduate of UCS. Gail is a musician, writer, Creation Spirituality minister, and president of the Creation Spirituality Communities. Her life's work has been nurturing spiritual growth primarily through the arts. Gail has co-led a weekly Creation Spirituality-based worship service, the Worship Jam, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for over 12 years and is newly retired. She received her D.Min in Creation Spirituality in 2010 from Wisdom University and joined the CSC board in 2013. In a moment, Gail will introduce Ardine, today's distinguished guest. But before we do that, we're very pleased to announce that our guest in December is going to be Matt Fox. And we had talked about doing a community share, and we will indeed do the community share, but we'll hold it back a little bit because of this exciting opportunity to interview Matt. Before we begin, this is our format. The interview runs about 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. So save your questions and comments until we open the floor. And these interviews will be recorded and archived on the CSC website for all to enjoy later on. Now, here's Gail Ransom to introduce our distinguished guest.
Greetings. We're so pleased to have Ardine Martinelli with us today. She was raised in Sacramento, California, and began her career. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, so Ardine was raised in Sacramento, California, and began her career in public education as a teacher, counselor, sex equity coordinator, and school principal. Although tenured and financially secure, she left her position to start her own business as an educational consultant in organizational change, facilitating skills for collaborative teams, transforming top-down or hierarchical organizations to site-based management, where all members of the site would share. This certainly prepared her to be receptive to creation spirituality. At 55, Ardine made another precipitous change to stop her business and pursue a D.Min at the University of Creation Spirituality. She graduated in 2001 and moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she is now a spiritual director. Ardine has just published a memoir, Listening to My Life, which will be the source of many of our questions today. I will be asking her to share how each of her major life transformations take on new meaning, seen by the vantage of her elderhood. Perhaps she will shed new light on your soul's journey as well. So Ardine, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. We're really glad to have you here, and I have enjoyed reading your book. Here is the book. I don't see myself, but I just want to make sure you can see the book here. Listening to My Life. So it's been really fascinating. I think the stories are like, they're familiar and special to you and unique, but familiar, and I think many of us have had pieces of this and had to do this very important working out of life during these really pivotal years for Western civilization, the last 70 years as things have changed so much since the Second World War. Look where we are now. So Ardine, what was the reason to write your book? What prompted you to put this all on paper?
You know, it was something I had been hearing for about 5 years. You know, you have a story to tell, internally hearing. I have what I call now the voice, which is spirits, whispers, or nudges that I try to fight a lot, but every time I say yes. And I've been hearing from spirit, you have a story to tell. I finally decided to sit down 2 years ago and write my memoir. And I did it because I do have a story to tell. I was raised in the 50s, tight gender role expectations, and then I came of age in the revolutionary hotbed of San Francisco in the early 60s. So I had these conflicting cultures. I did not understand for a long time. When I married, I was an abused wife, and yet I'm out in the public advocating for women's rights. Nobody would have seen me as an abused wife. You know, we have a stereotype that they're poor and can't get, they have to stay, blah, blah. I could have left. I was emotionally connected to that marriage. So I knew that the context of my life might be different than other women's, but I think as women, we share some really universal truths. And one of those is often giving up our own sense of agency for other people. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to share my story. And like I've said to friends, vulnerability's never been a high point of mine. I kind of like to stay strong and move forward, and I don't share the parts. Well, hello, this book is all about vulnerability. I have put it all out, and I just laugh saying, well, Spirit, when you kick me, you really kick me. So the book shares my experiences as a child, my experiences as an abused wife, but it also shares the joys and strengths of my career. And so there's always a balance. And when I get into UCS and its transformative power, I'll talk more about the 4 paths and how those impacted me. But the 4 paths were throughout my life. There was a balance of light and dark. You know, the career kept me moving and going. So I wrote the story for women to let them know they're not alone and to share the journey through fear to trust and what that journey for me looked like. And what I'm aware of is women, we don't tell our stories. We're not asked to tell our stories. And I think we have amazing, amazing stories to tell that we can learn from each other. If you notice right now, memoirs are one of the best-selling books around. People are writing memoirs right and left. Women that are finally telling their stories. So that's what precipitated me writing the book.
So thank you. And thank you for writing. So I have, in that your life, professional life, was a lot of doing good. You helped out a lot of people. You helped children when you first started in elementary education, and you liked that personal relationship, and then you became a counselor, and again you helped children. Then you created these programs that were for children who were really falling off the edge. You bothered to do the data and find the ones who were having trouble, and then you made this new innovative program for each one having their own mentor to help them get through school. And that kind of creativity on the edge that you had went all the way through your life. And I wonder if you could reflect then upon what you wrote about with Helen Duke's words about the trap of good works for good women. How did that affect you from the beginning through to now?
Well, you know, I'm kind of at a place that one of the gifts of writing my book was bringing clarity to my own life and looking at the threads that carried through my life. And there were 2 threads that carried through my entire life, and it still carries through. And the first thread was deep listening. I think there's such power in listening to each other, in deep listening. And I realized that as a child, I was not listened to, I was not seen, I was not heard. I was of the generation that children are to be seen and not heard. And I remember hearing from a man who did a video in the 80s for teachers called What You Are Is Where You Were When. And he said, what you missed as a child becomes extremely important to you as an adult. Listening was what I missed. And my entire career was listening to students, to staff, now as a spiritual director, to individuals. But my entire career was around giving voice to the voiceless, and doing that by listening and letting them hear their own voices. So that was the first thread for my career that followed through everywhere. And it was a passion, and it's still a passion of mine. The next thread, and I won't go into it all, but I had a lot of woundedness around the Catholic Church growing up. And my parents were a Christian interfaith marriage. My mother was Protestant, my father was Catholic. And I was raised with immense religious bigotry in my own family. I would hear the Catholics talk about my mother and, as a Protestant and what, blah, blah, blah. And they were so upset my father had married outside the church. And I'm not sure if they were more upset he had married a non-Italian or if he had married outside the church, but they were very upset that he had married a Protestant non-Italian. I also heard my mother's side of the family absolutely ridicule that papist my mother had married. How can he believe in the Pope? And I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and I kept thinking, what is wrong? Why are they putting down my parents? Even as a 6-year-old, I thought, religion doesn't make them. It's how they behave and act. So that bigotry as a child in my own family became a springboard in my adult life to be an activist for all kinds of civil rights, whether it's gender, race, sex. I have been on the social justice front lines throughout the 60s, where I developed that at Berkeley and the free speech movement, and then throughout the 70s and the 80s, and that carried through my career. So, Gail, those were the two threads that I realized carried me through life and gave me voice. And what I'm aware of in my activism is I put we in the 60s and 70s put all of our rage against the establishment out there, but we didn't do any reflecting. We didn't look at ourselves. So for me, there was no inner-outer alignment. I was still totally coping on behaviors I had developed as a child to survive, but I was putting the rage I felt inside out against the establishment. So I think that's I'm hoping the young people today who are activists are doing a better job of, like they say in liberation, theology, reflect, act, reflect. And we didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the threads that came through my book.
I think for our listeners and for everybody participating here, we might want to hear a little bit more about growing up, what it was like in your household, your father's messages to you as a girl, and your mother's, perfectionism, and how that affected you as a child, so that we might be able to see how that developed and what you were able to do with that during your life to benefit yourself and others.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, I was raised with the tight gender restrictions of the 50s, and some of those messages I got at home, others I got in the culture. And I can still remember my mother making comments like, don't ever tell a boy you know more than him, make him feel like do what he wants to do, don't disagree with him. Those were all of our messages in the 50s. And beside that, I was raised in an alcoholic household. My father was an alcoholic. So those two perfect storms of gender role expectations for a girl, and my role in the family was to be peacemaker, rescuer, codependent, take care of, have no conflict. Those two just melded into a young woman with no personal advocacy. So I found my voice for others, but I had no voice for myself. And that's what allowed me to be a weak, an abused wife. It was like my father wasn't abusive. Verbally he was, but not physically. So that was one thing. And then my mother was a perfectionist. And I mean, real perfectionist. I'll just share one really quick story that's in the book. She worked, and she was only one in our whole neighborhood of a mother who worked outside the home. And so I was responsible to keep the house and get food on the table at a young age. I remember one Saturday at 12 years old, I decided Mom was out working, and I decided I would clean the kitchen. And I mean, I worked so hard. I shined, and I get the stove, refrigerator, all the dishes were dried and put away. I was so proud of myself. And Mom came in, and I was just popping. I was just waiting for her to say, "Great job." And so I didn't say anything, and I just watched. And she walked around, and she looked. And I finally said, "What are you saying?" And she stopped at the doorway to the dining room. She stood on her tiptoes. She went up to the top of the seal of the door and said, "You forgot this." I had those kind of experiences, and it was another cringe-worthy, don't do anything that other people don't want you to do. So I was raised to live in what the AA calls impression management. Figure out what people expect, be what they want, don't rock the boat. And so I was a perfect person for an abusive relationship with those interior messages.
Mm-hmm.
That was my childhood. Alcoholism and gender role stereotypes and perfectionism. And I love my parents dearly. Now I know they came to parenting with their own wounds.
Mm-hmm. So when was it that you what was the first big turning point when you began to notice that you had a voice and some rights and an inner life to be expressed?
Well, I guess I've had several, but the first I would say was San Francisco State in 1963. I can remember being all of a sudden asked what my opinion was, and I'm going, opinion? I don't have one. The professors wanted us to have an opinion. I remember being on a street corner in Berkeley, California, and Mario Savio, who was one of the leaders of the free speech movement, was yelling through a bullhorn, "We have voice. We have a right. The university cannot take away our voice and make rules." And I'm going, we have a voice? Really? That was a turning point for me. I graduated, I taught for 2 years, and I really realized my 20s were rebellion. I left the United States and lived in Europe because I couldn't stand that we had elected Nixon. I then came back home, did graduate work for counseling, and I ended up living in a commune. So I did all of these alternative ways of living to try to find my own voice. I found a strong external voice, but nothing had strengthened my internal voice of my own personal. So those were, San Francisco State was a turning point. I think then, and I really saw this as one of the themes of my book, I really became aware that I've made decisions based on spirit without knowing that spirit was guiding me. So like Gail said, I left a job, a tenured position, successful career at 43 with no idea of what I was going to do, but I just knew I had to leave. Then after doing that, I started a business. And then I ended up closing that business after 10 years, again, with not an idea of what life was going to bring me. And now I know it was always spirit guiding me. But back then I believed in a transcendent male God up here who really didn't interfere with any of our lives. So when I got to UCS is when I learned about the immanent God. and the God within and the divine essence that we all have. So I'll tell the story of UCS, and then we can go into my wonderful experience of UCS. I had stopped my business. I didn't know what I was going to do. And someone showed me a book by Matthew Fox, The Reinvention of Work. I had never heard of Matthew Fox. I was not particularly a religious person. I was a spiritual person, but not religious. There was no real church I belonged to. And I read the book, and it was like, yeses were popping out of me. He was saying, especially about education, everything I had been trying to do to restructure schools, to give all the stakeholders a voice. And then he would do that. He talked about, all the institutions. And I thought, I've got to find out more about this man. And spirit brings you what you need. I'm so clear of that, and my life shows it. 2 months later, I've started my deep, dark journey downward into the cave with a spiritual director, trying to heal after trying to figure out why I am the way I am. And I read that Matthew Fox is coming to Seebeck, Washington, which is 30 miles from Tacoma. And he's going to do a half-day workshop. And I thought, well, I've got to go to that. I need to find out who this man is. So I went. And I was so impressed with, you all know him. I mean, he was quiet and shy, but when he started talking, he was filled with fire. And what he was saying really resonated with me. But he also talked about a new program he was starting called the University of Creation Spirituality. And it was in Oakland, California. And I thought, I've got to pay attention to that. So I picked up the brochure on it, and I went home. I read the brochure. I had never heard of creation spirituality, didn't have a clue what it was. But something kept calling me to that brochure. And I talked to my spiritual director about it. And so I finally called UCS, and I talked to Dorsey Blake. Probably, Penny, you're the only one that remembers Dorsey. Wonderful man. And he sent me an application. So I thought, I'm going to apply. And now I love to write. I could not fill out that application. And my spiritual director finally said, what is it you're taking this year off for? It was to listen and be still, not to apply for another program, because this was October. So I took the application down, and I continued my journey into healing with my spiritual director. And in January, I thought, well, I'll try again. So I pulled it out, and I could write everything in a minute. So I applied and started UCS in 1998. And I still remember, because my way of succeeding was in my head. I was very articulate. I knew I had the knowledge, but I didn't go much below my head. So my way of survival was sticking to my head and moving forward. Well, you can't do that at UCS. I walked in, and I remember walking up the stairs, and here is the whole cosmos along one wall, and getting up there for my first class, and they have something called body prayer. And I'm thinking, what the hell is this? Now, remember, I don't know creation spirituality. I don't know Matthew Fox, but something is telling me I have to be here. I was flabbergasted. They wanted me to just move to the music and to prayer and chant, and I've never done anything like that. And I remember the first 3 or 4 days, I was thinking, I just watched everybody else to make sure I was doing it right. Does anyone else ever have that feeling? And I'm thinking, I don't belong here. I've got to get out. But something kept saying stay. And I did stay. And that was my introduction to UCS, was an absolute newbie to creation spirituality. It just was a yes that said I have to be here, and it transformed my life.
So while you were there, you also had some experiences with artist meditation. which you said you were a left brain person, but then you had to use your body and your right side of your brain.
And which was really hard. And so I made the decision. The morning classes were academic. And we had some of the best teachers I think you could ever ask for. Mm-hmm. But we had afternoon with arts and meditation, which was all the creative side. And I made a decision to take the hardest arts and meditation classes I could take, the ones that scared me the most. That was mask making. Mm-hmm. That was Shabda Yoga with Russell Paul. That was finding your voice, singing. I mean, things I would never. There was one with Andrea, somebody on painting. I forced myself to go to the ones that were the scariest. And they were amazing. My right side began to wake up. I dance all the time now. I mean, I love it. And I know that my creativity is more in the business I created or the activities, but I love to write. And so the teachers I had there were absolutely amazing. Like I said, the gifts that I got personally, the theology, once I figured it out, it took me a little while to figure out creation spirituality. The theology grounded me in a theology that for the first time in my life made sense. It was a theology of inclusivity. It was a theology of deep ecumenism that from my childhood up, I had wanted to believe. I wanted interfaith dialogue. It was a theology of creation-centered, seeing the earth as sacred, and the earth's always been my church. And the four paths just blew me away because the journey I had started mirrored the four paths. I would go into the dark and really begin to look at my childhood experiences, how they impacted me. And that was the via negativa. And at the same time, I reintroduced myself to hiking, and I began hiking on the trails of Mount Rainier. I began gardening, so that brought the awe and the wonder and the positiva. The four paths. So now I see the via creativia was UCS, all the new discoveries. And aging for me is the via transformativa, the celebration of a life well lived. So some of the experiences, I'll never forget, I took a class called Understanding Evil with Matthew Fox and Clarissa Piccoli-Este. Mm-hmm. And Clarissa said something in that class that just blew open my belief in what we're here for. She said, I may paraphrase it, but she said, when you choose to incarnate, you choose to forget. And you spend the rest of your life trying to remember. I will never forget that quote because I think that's our whole spiritual journey, is to come home to who we were when we came into this life and to get rid of all the lies and assumptions and beliefs that have been layered on that precious divine being. And then she said, and I see it playing out in politics, she said, and evil happens from those people who choose not to remember. And I think we're playing that out right now. So many teachers, I could go on and on about the gifts of that, but
tell us about Russell Paul. Tell us about your experience with Russell. I'm very jealous.
Russell Paul. Yeah. I don't know, Penny, you know Russell, but did any of you have Russell Paul when you were at UCS? He did an arts and meditation called Shabda Yoga. And did you take it too, Penny? And he would have us do, he's Hindu, and he would have us do chants. And we would chant. There was no talking. And I remember on a Wednesday, we were chanting for 45 minutes, getting our vibrations up. And then he said, now be quiet and just sit. And I did. And all of a sudden, it was almost out of body. I put my hands out like this, and I saw my heart shatter in pieces and fall into my hand. And I said, it's yours, God. I can't hold it anymore. I couldn't speak for a long time. And that was the first really big crack of my heart, because I had really closed my heart off. And that cracked. I've had a lot of cracks since, but that was the first crack of, I can't hold it anymore. It's yours, God. And giving myself permission to be vulnerable and trust in something greater than me.
As I'm listening to you right now, I see your life as like a tree, and whereas you started out in this as the trunk, tight and enclosed, and then as you got older, you branched out in so many different ways, and in the social justice ways, but in the personal spirituality. And I think of the sap, and I'm thinking, what a life force was born in you, that even though clapped down and discouraged in your childhood, how it kept on insisting and insisting and insisting, so that you grew into your true self. And of course, I think we all have that. We have this life force just insisting on running through our bodies and running through our lives, and allowing us to be creative and present to each other. But your life shows me that.
What a beautiful image, Gail. I feel that. I am one of the many themes from writing my book was spirit's movement in my life, my entire life, without me knowing it. Now I'm aware of it. And now I know when I'm getting hit upside the head by spirit. Mm-hmm. I still don't always listen, but at least I know it's spirit. And but it's like, what a blessed life I've had. And I'm really, really aware that there is not one experience in my life I would change. We all come into life and suffers. Nobody gets a free pass from suffering. We're all wounded in some ways. And I think our journey is to excavate the layers that have created that wounding, so we come back to who we came in as. And I feel blessed to really understand that and live that life at this point in time, and be grateful for every single thing that happened to me. I'm not grateful I was physically abused, but I also know I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't experienced that. Mm-hmm. I think part of my writing the book was to say there's hope after pain. There is life after pain, but it takes us to really want to explore. I used quotes throughout my book. Every single chapter had a quote, and two quotes that come to me was this. Alice Walker said, and I loved it, I used it a couple of times in my book. She said, the most forward territory is within ourselves. And that's really true. We don't go deep into ourselves and here, or a lot of us don't. The other quote that I love, and I used it in one of my chapters, and I wrote it down because I think it's so powerful. It's by Buddha.
Oh, yes, that was beautiful.
And he said, if you focus on the hurt, you will continue to suffer. If you focus on the lesson, you will continue to grow. And I think that's been my life. I think once I realized that the behaviors I had developed as a child for survival were no longer serving me. In fact, they were keeping me from living a full life. And that's when I said, I've got to stop my business and I've got to heal. I've got to find how do I become whole again? So
I wonder in our lives why, if we want to go back to the way we were at the beginning, to find ourselves as we were. So then why don't we just stay there in the first place? I'm just saying, what's the purpose of having this life that takes us far away and then back to it again?
Right back to
arc, huh?
To come right back to the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But we aren't the same.
It's a good question, Gail. I think that's the purpose. This is just me. I think that's the purpose of life. To move through the woundedness, to suffer. There's no one gets a free pass. But then to look at the suffering and the woundedness as a way to grow. I turned off the phone, but somehow it didn't go off. So I think for me, that's the spiritual journey. You know, I often think about Richard Rohr and Jungian therapies. Richard Rohr wrote Falling Upwards, and he based that on Jung's theory of we spend the first half of our lives acquiring and building an identity, and we spend the second half letting go. And that's certainly been the arc of my life. And I think that we have to have the suffering to do that arc.
Well, also your suffering created some universal truths, right, that you wanted to share with us. They produced that, which you wouldn't if you just stayed like preborn. You wouldn't be able to share with us.
Yeah.
So what are your universal truths?
Oh, wow. I think I said a lot of them through the UCF, but my universal truths would be that the mystics are the other gift for me from UCF. And the universal truth of mine is that we are all love and compassion. That's what we're coming home to. That's what we came in as. Another universal truth for me is the interconnected of all beings. We're one with everything. We're one with nature, with each other. There is no other. And that's the universal truth to me. That's the globalism that Trump can't stand. But I believe we're all one and we're all connected. And I get that from the mystics. Another universal truth, Thomas Merton said it in a book I read and I love it. He said, when you find God, you find yourself. And when you find yourself, you find God. God is here. God is right here. And we all have different words, but to me, it's the namaste. The divine within me greets the divine within you. That I wished I could live that all the time. I don't. I think that's part of my journey, is to figure out how to live it. I remember Jeremy Taylor saying one time, it's so easy to find the oneness in nature. It's damn hard when you're on the streets with the homeless. And that's true. It's harder to find oneness when you're with others than it is when you're in nature. So I think those are some of my universal truths.
Thank you. And do you have anything else to add on wisdom of aging?
Yeah. I love this time of my life. I'm 75 years old. I am blessed with good health, so I can still remain active. I still hike. I walk every day. But how I've changed is I've spiritually slowed down. It's like when you slow down, you show up. I am much more cognizant of the moment. And I remember way back reading Ram Dass's, Be Here Now, and then reading Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. And it only got so far. Now it's making all kinds of sense. For me, aging has given me permission to slow down. It's given me permission to show up to the birds at my feeder, to the flowers in my garden, to an unexpected phone call from a friend and not feel like I don't have time for this right now. The other gift for me is I don't have anything to prove anymore. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to achieve anything. I can just rest in my own sense of peace and contentment. I don't always do that. I still have growing edges, and I'll share those in a minute. And then I think the really big one for me, because I lived in that whole impression management place for so long, is I'm learning not to care what other people think. I haven't gotten there totally, but I'm learning that I'm okay right the way I am, and I don't have to try and be what other people think I should be. My growing edge still is the struggle between being and doing. I have been a doer for so long that I still will get into the mindset I'm wasting time, I'm not doing enough. And that's a really old story, and I'm trying to get rid of some of my old stories. The other thing I've learned, and this may be a universal truth, is that even though we talk about letting go, we never let go of the wounds. They will always be there. We've just learned how to respond to them differently. I think the journey spiral. Mm-hmm. And so at one point I come to not feeling good enough, and it takes me a long time to deal with that. But pretty soon when I get to my not good enough, I go, oh, there's that old friend. I just embrace it and let it be. We don't get rid of the stories, but we know how to respond differently to them. Mm-hmm. So aging's been a real blessing for me. It's been haven't totally come home yet. I still have lessons to learn, but I'm kind of excited where it's going to take me.
I sometimes wonder in this quiet that we have in these last years that I feel a little guilty because there are all the young people are working so hard and it seems like this is out of balance. I'd like to have that silence for them too. I just wonder if we could do that earlier. So I'm wondering what kind of advice you would give your younger self or younger selves today.
You know, if I were to talk to my 16-year-old today, I think the first thing I would say is be true to yourself. Don't worry about what other people think. Just listen to yourself. And that's the title of my book, Listening to My Life. Mm-hmm. Listen to yourself. Trust your own North Star. We all have one. I don't know if I would have been able to hear that at 16, but that's what I would have loved to have been able to say to her. Hmm. And you know, Gail, I thought when you were talking about the young people today, I'm still active. I mean, I'm still going to marches and I'm still writing letters, but I'm not powering through, you know, like I went to the Protect Mueller rally that was here, or I go to the women's. So I still remain active, but I don't do it in an angry kind of way. I really do it in the support for the younger people. Mm-hmm. But what came to me a couple of months ago, and it just sticks with me, I think our role as elders is to be guardians of sanity. We're living in an insane world. And I look at young people between social media pulling on them and expectation. They don't have a minute of silence. And I think maybe the gift we can give them is to show them sanity through modeling, through listening to them, helping them slow down by just listening to their stories. So I kind of like that term, be guardians of sanity in this insane world.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else that you would, it's wonderfully deep. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us or express to us that I haven't found a way to ask yet? Did we cover the 4 paths as you
covered the 4 paths?
Your creativity, your transformation, and
the themes, and I'm open to having dialogue with the people listening. I'd love to hear.
I think that's next. And I'm going to unmute everybody, and then Penny will, who's wonderful with encouraging and bringing questions forth, will take over. Penny.
Great.
Okay.
All
Just
right.
got herself muted. Good. Joan, I can't unmute you, so you seem to be unmuted on your own. So,
Jan?
let you know if you want to ask a question. Okay.
Great, Jan's joined us. It's now time for the question and answer and reflection and comment. And I know for myself that several things bubbled up in hearing your story and listening more deeply. One is, this is just a comment from an elder from Alaska who said, and your words brought this up for me, Angwan means hello, my other self. So that's how they greet each other. Hello, my other self.
Ah.
But Ardine, just to launch us off a little bit, I thought of the Me Too movement, and I know that for myself, it brought up a lot of memory, a lot of, oh, yeah, that happened and that happened. And I wondered if you could just comment a little bit about how the Me Too movement struck you.
Really good question, Penny. My book was in the finishing pages, was pretty much finished and going through the editing process when the Me Too movement broke out last in the winter. It felt like I felt vindicated, if that, and not just from my abuse, but from the sexual harassment I and many women my age that were in administrative positions or teaching experience. And we didn't do anything about it because so there was a vindication, and then there was a deep sadness. Bless you. For it's still happening 25, 30 years after we were fighting against it back then. And then deep anger that these men still feel they can use their power to treat women any way they want. And now we have a model of that in the White House. And so I think I went through, and so I think there was grief, and I'm still feeling deep grief just about our government right now, around the environment, around the other, whether they're the brown people coming up from Central America or Muslims or women who are being so denigrated right now. So the Me Too movement to me was like a breath of fresh air, and also a sense of deep sadness and anger that we have not come very far.
Thank you. And do people listening in have comments to share at this time? I wonder if Jan is still here. I mean, Jan was in our class, I think, as well. Mm-hmm. She may be gone now.
I think I saw her just moving out, so.
Okay. All right. Well, I pulled this. It's Friends of Silence. It's a great little publication that Nan Merrill started years ago, and her people are continuing. And coincidentally, your speaking brought this up for me. Authentically empowered people forgive naturally. They forgive because they do not want to carry the burden of not forgiving like heavy suitcases through a crowded airport. Forgiveness and harmony go together. When you forgive someone, nothing stands between you and that person. Even if the person you forgive does not like you, you have laid down your suitcase and you travel lightly.
Oh, nice.
Very nice. Yeah.
And I hear that, and I wonder, are there words you can share about your husband and ex-husband and how you've been able to process that, and certainly only what you care to share?
You know, I forgiving Frank was a long process, and Gail's read the book. I call him Jim in the book because he's still alive, and you cannot, it would be defamation of character since I didn't file a police report. So I had to change his name, but his name was Frank. And it took me a long time to forgive him. But then I looked at his own childhood. It's like when you really look at where someone else came from, he was so wounded and so insecure that his only way was to try and control. And what was fascinating about him is he loved my feminism, but he didn't like it in the house. You know, he loved that I was a feminist out in the public, and his favorite song he had in his office was I Am Woman. That was back in the day. But when I was at home, he wanted me under his thumb. And it took me a really long time to understand that and to understand the dynamics. I have deep sadness for him, but I've forgiven him. The person that has been the hardest for me to forgive is myself. Is to forgive myself for allowing myself to be treated that way. And I think if you talk to abused women, almost all will say the same thing. Forgiving myself has been the hardest journey. And writing the book deepened that forgiveness because I was able to put into words that scared wife. I was able to put into words that frightened little girl that wanted to please for anything. And so the book created a much deeper self-forgiveness. So I think for me, the issue has been self-forgiveness, not, it was easier to forgive the others before me.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
You know, I forgot to say, and oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Rosemary.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. What you just said, first of all, I love your story. There's so much there that I could definitely relate to, and it's a beautiful, to where you've come is amazing. And I'm so happy to see that because I feel I'm at a turning point. I'm now 58. I feel I'm just about to step into that, if you want to call the elder years, right? Or probably there. Maybe I'm already there.
No, you're
but what you
into.
Stepping into, okay. What you just said was that part about so easily forgiving others, and it was most difficult to forget yourself. Actually, while I'm telling you, while I'm trying to say this to you, I have such, I don't know, I feel a rush going through my body. It feels like anxiety, but because I think that I'm at a crucial place in my life where I'm going a little bit deeper with, you know, the internal work. And that's, I'm seeing that is, it's not anything else but forgiveness for myself. And I was, yeah, sorry.
I said that's generally it, Rosemary. Thank you. Go ahead.
I feel like it's at the deepest place, and maybe it's the last place we get to before you know, the other things are opening up for us. I don't know if you felt that way or not.
It's been the last piece of forgiveness for me with myself. Yeah.
And you also mentioned having a spiritual, was it a spiritual director or someone that's and I imagine that was a very helpful support for you.
Well, it was, and that was going to be my question to you. If you're going into the dark, you have a companion, someone that will walk with you.
So this is what and the reason I'm asking is because I don't have someone like that in my life right now, and I think that that's something that is really important for me to have. And I don't know how it will show itself. Like, I'm in therapy right now with a psychotherapist, but that's not, it's different, right?
They're different, and they can go hand in hand. I am now a spiritual director. I forgot to say that. I do spiritual. I went for 2 years formation to become a spiritual director. They go hand in hand, but what we do as spiritual directors is hold a sacred container for you to find out God's movement in your life and where you're called. And so I think both would work for you at the same time. Don't give up psychotherapy. Where do you live, Rosemary?
In Toronto, Canada.
Oh, Canada, we're just there. Yeah.
Rosemary, go to the internet and Google Spiritual Directors International.
Okay.
They have a list of spiritual directors in every city internationally, and we have a large Canadian contingency.
Is that right? Eh? Because as I'm here, I see you, I hear you, and you're the vision of somebody I'd love, somebody who's ahead of you and has walked the path and is still walking, but has been there before I have, and I would love to have somebody like that in my life right now.
You will find one, and if not Spiritual Directors International, keep looking. I do want to say that spiritual directions is a misnomer. We do not give direction.
Yes.
Our whole job is companioning. We just bear witness and help you hear your own story.
Right.
And
that's amazing.
Powerful. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So
this is why I had to talk to you today then. Amazing.
Do Google Spiritual Directors International.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you so much.
Good luck. And you're on the right path, babe.
You guys are great.
It's delicious. It's awful and delicious at the same time.
And be sure to keep the positiva flowing when you're doing the negativa.
Of course.
Whatever gives that, mine was nature, but boy, that kept me up out of the rabbit hole.
Right, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm on a pause right now because I've just stopped doing everything. I took a break from work.
Whoa.
Well,
and
you and I have the same path, don't we? Good for you. How long are you on your break?
Well, I only have now, I don't have to go back to work till January. So I have another month, like a good month before I have to go, a month and a half before I have to go back. So I've already started doing some of the work, and I know, and it's been a lot of me time right now.
Blessings to you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. And same to you.
Thanks.
Namaste.
Namaste.
And Rosemary, not to be ageist in any way, shape, or form, but I thought we had a millennial among us.
Yeah, I do too.
Almost close, I'll tell you.
Everything's relative.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah.
If a question or comment doesn't occur, what reflection on Ardine's story stands out and touches you, if you care to share that?
I'd like to just a question and a comment, I guess. The question, I haven't been through the CSS program, so I don't know what the 4 paths are that you mentioned. If you could say a little bit more about that.
I'd love to.
And then also, you said that your father was emotionally abusive?
Verbally and emotionally.
Yeah.
He was very verbally abusive. Yeah.
I mean, my father would get really angry. And is that kind of what you're, I mean, you don't have to share more if you don't want to, but
verbally,
just kind of whatever your experience was of
my
whatever you
experience with
experienced.
Dad was I was his little princess until I started my period. Dad was my soft landing from my mother, to be honest. My mother was the hardcore. But when I started my period, all of a sudden Dad wouldn't talk to me and he pushed me away, and I'm going, what's going on here? Well, now in hindsight, I know a lot of men have that problem when their daughters start their period because all of a sudden they're becoming sexual beings. Yeah. I didn't understand that then. And my father, first generation Italian, And he was very clear that there were two kinds of women, Madonnas or whores, period. That was it. And I was going to damn well be a Madonna. He was going to make sure of that. Well, of course, I didn't know any of this back then. So when I started dating, I'd get dressed to go out, and I'd come into the living room, and my father would drink more when I was dating. I didn't notice that at the time, but I do now. And he'd sit in the chair, well, I don't know what in the hell you're dressing up for. You're just going to take your clothes off like some slut.
Oh.
And so I got that throughout my teenage years. I'd come home from a date, and the next morning, well, he put his hands up your arm, and my mother never said a word.
Mm.
So that, as I learned later, that was verbal sexual abuse. And I didn't know that. He never touched me physically. But that really, at that sprouting sexual age as a teenager, it really, really impacted my sexual growth for a long time. So I did a hell of a lot of experimenting in the 20s just to figure out who in the hell I was. So that would be a form of verbal abuse.
Yeah.
When he was drunk, he would call me names. He would, and it was just his own anger. So I got his verbal abuse and my mother's physical. She used the belt. So, they kind of played off of each other. I don't know if that helps you on verbal abuse.
Yeah, I just was wondering how to compare your experience. But
the four paths. Yeah. Did you have more questions, or do you want me to?
Four paths, yeah.
What I did in my book is I didn't use the Latin terms that Matt uses because I think they turn people off. So the four paths are the via negativa, which I call letting go, going into the dark, letting go. The via positiva, which I call awe, wonder, delight, all of those things that just bring us joy. They light up our lives. That's the positiva. And the via creativa is new discoveries, which UCS was for me. It was a smorgasbord of new ideas and discoveries. And the via transformativa is celebration and justice. And I'm celebrating my aging. That's my transformativa. But those were the words other than the via that Matt uses. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And Penny and any others, did I kind of give that correctly on the four paths?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Joanna Macy's term for via creativa is seeing with new eyes.
Yeah, the new discovery, seeing with new eyes. Yeah, and I love her calling. Well, Thomas Berry does too, but the great turning, and that's what we're in, the great turning. And I think Trump is a death rattle of the old. We've needed that. We've needed to get all that poison out from under the rocks. He's bringing it out. But he's a death rattle of the old. I think the turning point is happening. I just hope not too late for the environment.
Rapid deployment.
Deployment. So, Joan, you might also just try our Creation Spirituality info.org website. We have like a very simple description of what creation spirituality is, very simple description of the four paths. So we have four paths, and we have the three vocations. Everyone is an artist, creative. Everyone is creative. Everyone is a mystic, and everyone is a prophet. So, and we can do that in many ways. Artists can be prophets. We don't all have to go out angry. I know in Ardine's book she talked about a peace rally she was attending where all the leaders were arguing intensely about how to do the peace rally. That kind of like misses the point there. So there's different kinds of prophetic work and activist work. But those are the three vocations that Matt says that we all have. We need to activate all three of them.
So that's creationspirituality.info? Is that what you
said? No, creation, spirituality. No space, nothing. .info.
Great.
And then you can look around a little bit. In fact, that's where you'll be able to revisit this interview if you'd like to. We have all of our interviews on that and there under experience.
One of the things Matt says, and Rosemary, I'll say it to you too, is the full spiritual journey is going through all four paths.
Right.
You don't stop at just the dark or that, but and they're not in alignment. You can go into one and flow into, it's more of a dance with all the paths.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be happening all the time, simultaneously all the time. And that was a big learning for me at UCS. Was I'm someone who has a DNA predisposition to depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so I carried it for a long, long time. And I was there. And when I finally, took in the idea of the paths, all of a sudden I could realize that the via negativa was its own path, but there were these other ones. And it was a very helpful cracking open, if you will, of what was possible for me. Huge in my learning.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of Ardine's story that touched me so was what I saw was the image of the cracked bowl with the gold in the crack. I mean, that's what I saw as you were talking, Ardine, is I see this beautiful woman who's come into her fullness and has been on a journey towards fullness all along with fullness, but it didn't come, on a platter. It was earned.
And it never does. We work through it. And I say in my book, and I know Gail's read it, so she knows this, the biggest cracking open that splayed me open was my brother's suicide. Because he was my protector, and he protected me from Dad. He was 4 years older, and he was my idol and my protector. And he committed suicide as a chronic alcoholic at 65 years old.
Oh.
That's just the history of alcoholism in families. I mean, it carries over and over. But that was a cracking open that just splayed me. And it's been a healing journey to get through. If anyone has ever experienced suicide in their family, the guilt and all the blame and everything that you just go through, that you need to move through and accept. I don't accept the guilt or blame, but to know that that's a piece of the journey.
What moment in working with children all these years do you carry with you as perhaps, the biggest shining star moment for you?
I think Gail alluded to it. It was in my book, and it really is a shining moment. I was principal of a 680 student body elementary school, and I made it a point to know every student's name, and I did. And so I'd always be out in the halls and greeting them and that. But it was such a big school that I would end up at lunchtime in my office with discipline problems instead of being out with the kids. And so one weekend, I thought, I've got to figure this out. Excuse me. And so I went home and I kept a discipline log. And so each time a kid came in, I would put down how long, And I went through that whole log for a year, and I found the kids that had been into my office 3 or more times. And out of 680 kids, 32 of them were listed. Only 32 were creating massive problems for the entire school. And when I looked at who they were kids that didn't have functional families. They didn't have parents that would or if one parent that would sign their progress report weekly, they didn't come to school. So I went to staff and I gave them the list, and I had 74 staff. So I'm not talking just teachers. I'm talking paraprofessionals, custodians, whatever. And I said, these 32 are the ones creating all the havoc in our school. And the teachers looked, the staff looked, and they weren't surprised. And I said, they need to have someone that listens to them. They need someone at this school to be their companion because they don't have it at home. So I asked for volunteers. I didn't assign. I just said there's 74 of you. There's going to be 32 of you that are willing to be a mentor for one of these kids. And the people immediately, you know, I got the 32 people. So there was one 5th grader called Ralph, who was a lumbering, big kid bully. He bullied everybody. And the sad thing was, Ralph was quite a bit more intelligent than his mom. So he had learned how to manipulate adults. And he was just a really hard case to crack. So about 2 or 3 days after the meeting, our custodian, John, walks into my office and says, I'm going to take Ralph as my kid. I'm going to help Ralph. And I said, great. And honest to God, he comes in the next week, and we had gone through a massive bond building, building a big new building. So we had all gone through that. So we had a new building now. And John comes in and says, well, I've started the screw patrol. And I said, what? And we all had that kind of humor. And I said, the screw patrol? He said, yeah. He said, I've put Ralph on the screw patrol. And I said, okay, John, go further. He said, well, you know, he said, we're a new building and we have all these new doors and windows and they all have screws. And we need to have those screws checked to make sure they're tight. And so that was the screw patrol. He got Ralph a little belt, tool belt, and every lunch hour, Ralph was seen with his tool belt for the next 8 months, checking doors and that with his screwdriver, and he was tightening screws. He did not create one more problem in that school. And his grades went up. And I mean, I still laugh at the screw patrol, but those are the kinds of highlights for me that just made being in the schools great, that we can every kid. And I think sometimes we give up on kids because we just don't have the time. So these people wanted to take the time for these kids. And I don't know what happened to Ralph, but that did make a difference in his life.
What a great story.
I have another one that's in my book that I just laugh at. I had 3 TLC, which is behaviorally disabled classrooms in my school. And these kids, there was a pre-kindergarten, a 2-3, and a 4-5. And these kids are severely emotionally disabled. I mean, they're intellectually fine, but they're really dangerous to themselves and sometimes other kids. So there was 12 per classroom. And I had the pre-K class, which are only 4 or 5-year-olds, across from our office. So one day we're a polling place for voting, and it's voters coming in, and these 2 little old ladies, now look at me. I'm calling them, they had white hair and they're walking in, but I'm saying these 2 old ladies walked in, and they're looking for the polling place. And just at the time, a little one escaped from the pre-kindergarten behaviorally disabled class. He's running past these women going, suck you, suck you. And I am in the office crossing my legs. I'm laughing so hard. And Ken, the assistant, runs out and grabs him and puts him over his shoulder and takes him out. And the women are just going like this. And I looked at my secretary and I said, wow, I'm glad they don't have their consonants down yet. Or he doesn't have his consonants down yet. I was expecting a call from the superintendent. But those kind of stories is what made being in schools wonderful. I mean, they really are. You just have to laugh. Kids are amazing. So.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Any other comments, or if we're winding down as we are time-wise, I wondered if we could just share one part of what was said today that you'll take away, whether it's a word, whether it's something, a story of Ardine's, or the four paths, just to share something that you heard today that will stick, because that's in all these elder interviews. What happens is we hang up and we go about our business, but we have had this extraordinary time with Ardine and her story, and it will stick for a while. And I'm just wondering what will stick with you. And as I say that, and I'm looking at my notes, what will stick with me is your transformation of vulnerability.
Yes.
Because you are standing in your full power, and you are totally open.
And it feels so good, Penny.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Gail?
Oh, I am inspired to slow down and get myself some silence and see what's going on with me. I'm at a transition point in my life, and I'm inspired by Ardine to do that myself. Follow in her path. Thank you, Ardine.
Thank you.
Rosemary?
Hey, you know, I have to say, everything touched me because her story, my story resonates a lot with Ardine's, but there were some key things that she said. The one about where she felt she was probably always being guided by spirit. And I think that that's something, you know, and what gave her her voice, where she finally finds her voice, that those are a couple of really resonating things that sit with me now. And I feel empowered, to be honest. Sitting with you, all of you today, is just, you know what, I don't even have words, because I just feel something, I feel like Spirit has guided me to be sitting here today, to just be in your presence, let alone have an opportunity to say something.
Oh.
Nita?
Yeah, I was on another call today where I was saying, can't we put this document we were looking at into simple words? And Ardine, right, you know, actually saying I have simple words to put the via paths into was very helpful.
Great. Oh, 410? I don't know.
Yes,
Sylvia.
it might be me, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, true. To the last person who spoke, it's hearing spirit, listening for spirit, and knowing that deep within, even if we're unaware of it, if we're trying, spirit is there and will lead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joan?
I really appreciated getting the four paths, the four paths, and also the idea that what we missed as a child becomes extremely important as an adult. I hadn't actually connected those dots, and I think for me, deep listening also resonates. So, yeah, very nice to get to tie that all together. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any final comments before we just do the reminder about next time? Any last comments?
Well, what did you take away, Penny?
It was the vulnerability piece.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That these for instance, I mean, spinning off of Ardine's response to Me Too and self-acceptance or self-forgiveness, for me, that Me Too moment has been rumbling around my head because I never thought we'd crack that egg. I never, I always thought it would stay below the surface. And, and when it happened, when it coalesced and it went via Transformativa came, there was like, it never dawned on me. And so then I sort of judged myself a bit on that. And, it's just what it was. And we were of a different time and we had a lot of other things going on in our lives. But, Ardine's example certainly is one that I will hold in my heart. Because I want to beam and radiate like you do, girl. Okay. Well, Gail, do you want to say a little bit about next month if we're all set to?
Well, I think we are, and we saw Matt Fox at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and he once he understood what it was we were about in these interviews, he agreed to do one. And so we took it. We took that opportunity, and so December 13th at this very same time, Matt will be our guest, and we can ask him all sorts of questions about he'll talk to us about refirement and how he certainly has been my inspiration to stay active and make a difference, about not spending your time in the golf courses and watching your finances go down or up, and but instead, continue to plow in. And I've said that to my daughters. That no, if you're going to take up breath on this globe, then you need to be doing something to give something back. And so Matt will talk to us about that. But we can also ask him some questions, some things that we would like to hear from him. And so that will be what will be happening on December 13th. And then probably in January, we'll have our reflection upon the holidays time together. We hadn't decided that as a group, but we're pushing it back just a little bit. And so that's it. And you have any people that you would like to hear from, let us know.
Yes. And also share that we do this. I mean, this turned into kind of a women's group.
It did.
And I love that about this. That we've never done one that had quite this feel, and it was just wonderful. So
I agree.
My gratitude to everyone.
Now, Rosemary, you raised your hand. Did you have something?
Hey, are you going to be sending out another email with the next interview time?
How did you find out about this one?
I got an email.
Okay, then you'll get another one. But I'll make sure that your email address is on that list.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for the privilege of being an interviewee. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm happy to have met the people that I didn't know. Thank you. This has been really nice. And namaste to everyone.
Namaste to you too. Namaste to all.
Blessings and a blessed Thanksgiving in the weeks ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, Thanksgiving to you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.